In the high valleys of the Alps, where the winter nights are long and the silence is absolute, the season arrives with a quiet reverence. But on one night of the year, a different sound arrives. It is not the festive chime of a sleigh bell. It is a heavy, iron warning. It is the sound of a beast that has been a part of these mountains for longer than any record. A procession of fire and fury erupts from the forest, shattering the winter's peace. A monster is unleashed upon the world, a horned enforcer who accompanies the coming of the holy season, not with gifts, but with a bundle of birch rods and an iron chain. His name is Krampus, and in recent years, his shadow has grown to cover the globe. But what is he, really? Is he a demon from the Christian hell? A ghost of a pagan god? Or something else entirely? To unmask this creature, we must journey back, past the firelight of the modern world, and into the ancient frozen darkness that first gave him form. This is his definitive history. To unmask the creature from the prologue, we must begin with the first and most tangible piece of evidence, his name. Before we explore the grand theories of gods and devils, we start with the word itself, the moniker that has echoed through alpine valleys for centuries, carrying within its very sound the essence of the creature's nature. The name Krampus is consistently traced by linguists to a single source, the old High German word Krampen, which means simply claw. This is the etymological anchor for the entire tradition. This linguistic root is a foundational statement of intent. This focus on a single, predatory body part is a common feature in the naming of ancient, primal spirits. It reduces the entity to its most terrifying capability. The name operates on a more fundamental level than a simple title or description. It defines him as a pure function, a verb made manifest as a being. It is a visceral warning, evoking the feeling of being grasped, held, and taken by something inhuman from the darkness. This name defines him by his primary action: to grasp, to snatch, and to seize. It immediately distinguishes him from the other companions of Saint Nicholas. Figures like Knecht Ruprecht, Servant Rupert, or Zwarte Piet, Black Pete, are defined by their subordinate, human-like roles within a social hierarchy. Krampus, by his very name, is a creature of physical, predatory violence, an agent of action rather than status. This linguistic root strongly supports the hypothesis that his origins are zoomorphic, or beast-like, a feral spirit of the wild that predates his later, more refined demonization. Before he was anything else, before he was a devil, a companion, or a Christmas mascot, his name tells us that he was, and is, the Claw. In the digital age, a new and compelling origin story for Krampus has taken root. It is a widespread and popular claim, repeated across countless websites and social media posts, that Krampus is a figure from Norse mythology. Specifically, the myth asserts that he is the son of Hel, the Norse goddess who presides over the underworld. This theory weaves a compelling narrative. It connects the obscure alpine figure to the globally recognized and popular pantheon of the Vikings. It gives him a dramatic lineage, casting him as a demigod of death, a prince of the underworld sent to the mortal realm to claim the wicked. It is a simple, potent, and exciting story. It is also completely false. A definitive history must correct common errors, not repeat them. The son of Hel theory is a modern conflation, a piece of folk etymology born from the cultural flattening of the internet age. Scholarly sources are unanimous and explicit on this point. The Krampus tradition roots itself inextricably in Central European, specifically Alpine traditions. It stands entirely apart from the figures and sagas of Norse paganism. There is no mention of a creature matching Krampus's description in the poetic or prose Eddas, the primary sources for Norse mythology. The name, the attributes, and the rituals are all geographically and culturally specific to the Alps. The confusion is a symptom of a modern tendency to blend all distinct European pagan traditions into a single, generic Viking monolith, stripping them of their unique local context. This conflation also ignores a critical difference in tone. Norse mythology, while grim, is an epic of gods, giants, and cosmic battles. The Krampus tradition is far more intimate and earthbound. It is a piece of community folklore, concerned with social order, household piety, and the very real dangers of a mountain winter. To insert Krampus into the Norse sagas is to fundamentally misunderstand the scale and purpose of his story. The truth is more specific and more interesting. Krampus is not a globally recognized Norse god. He is a hyperlocal Alpine spirit. His story belongs to the isolated valleys, the unique cultural pressures, and the specific pre-Christian beliefs of the people who lived in the shadow of the Eastern Alps. To establish his true origins, we must leave the mythical shores of Scandinavia and dig into the much older, rockier soil of his Alpine homeland. To find the true root of Krampus, we must look past the Christian devil and search for the archetypes that haunted the European imagination long before the first church bells echoed through the Alps. The most likely ancestor, the foundational template for the horned beast, is a figure known to folklorists as the Wild Man. This archetype is found across the continent, from the British woodwoes to the Germanic Schrat. He is a paradoxical being, a human-like creature who exists entirely outside of human civilization. Covered in hair, leaves, or fur, he lives in the most remote parts of the forest, the mountains, or the swamps. He represents the absolute boundary between the cultivated world of the village and the untamed chaos of the wilderness. The Wild Man is a liminal being, existing in the threshold between states. He is both man and beast, nature and humanity. His appearance in folklore often signals a time when these boundaries are themselves dissolving, during the turning of the seasons, particularly the dead of winter. Crucially, the community's engagement with the Wild Man went beyond simple fear. He was a figure whose power was to be confronted and managed through ritual. In many seasonal folk traditions, a member of the community would dress in a costume of moss, fur, or straw, embodying the Wild Man. This figure would then be chased, captured, and sometimes symbolically killed by the villagers. This was a powerful act of sympathetic magic. By ritually taming the personification of the wild, the community believed it could assert some measure of control over the chaotic forces of nature itself. The Wild Man was also seen as a bringer of fertility. His untamed, virile energy was essential for the renewal of the crops and the community in the spring. His role was therefore markedly ambivalent. He was a terrifying figure from the darkness, a symbol of the chaos that threatened to overwhelm the fragile order of civilization. Yet, he was also a necessary and even vital part of the cosmic cycle, a chaotic force that had to be confronted and integrated for the world to be reborn. It is from this complex, ambivalent, and deeply rooted archetype that Krampus almost certainly evolves. He is the Alpine incarnation of the Wild Man, a figure adapted to the specific terrors of a mountain winter. The shaggy fur, the connection to the wilderness, and the appearance during a specific chaotic winter ritual are all direct inheritances from this older tradition. The key difference, the feature that would eventually allow for his transformation into a Christian devil, was the addition of a single, potent symbol: the horns. This addition would connect him to an even older and more specific set of pre-Christian beliefs. The addition of horns to the wild man archetype was a transformative act. This feature connected the figure to one of the most persistent and resonant religious images in ancient Europe, the archetype of the horned god. Long before the Christian devil claimed the symbol, horns were a mark of divinity, virility, and lordship over the natural world. Figures like the Celtic Cernunnos, the Horned One, depict a master of animals, a liminal deity who sits between the human and the beast, the cultivated and the wild. The horns of a stag or a ram are a crown bestowed by nature itself, a symbol of the untamed life force of the forest. By giving the wild man horns, the Alpine peoples were elevating him from a simple boogeyman into a true nature spirit, a being with a more primal, sacred connection to the land. This ancient reverence for horned figures provides the fertile ground from which the Krampus legend could sprout. While a direct, unbroken line of descent is impossible to prove, the thematic connection is undeniable. The horned Krampus is an echo of this older worldview, a memory of a time when the most sovereign forces in the universe were the spirits of the remote woods and the high mountains. One scholarly hypothesis for a specific pagan precursor points to the long history of the Roman Empire in the Alps. When the Romans conquered the region, they brought their god of the woods and boundaries, Silvanus, a rugged, often horned figure whose worship was particularly strong among the common people. Over centuries of Roman Alpine syncretism, it is plausible that the image of Silvanus merged with local wild man spirits, leaving a ghost in the folk memory that would later inform the Krampus figure. However, the most famous and specific theory was put forward by the anthropologist Maurice Bruce in his seminal 1958 paper, The Krampus in Styria. Bruce looked at the evidence and came to a different conclusion. He argued that the true identity of Krampus was an almost perfect preservation of a different figure entirely, the horned god of the witches. This theory, influenced by the work of scholar Margaret Murray, proposed that a pre-Christian, horned deity was the central object of worship in hidden witch cults across Europe. Bruce saw Krampus not as a remnant of a Roman god, but as the most complete and living relic of this secret, horned god of the witches. Bruce wrote, "There seems to be little doubt as to his true identity, for, in no other form is the full regalia of the horned god of the witches so well preserved." He saw the birch switch and the chains as potential ritual objects from these very same witch covens, remnants of pagan initiation rites that Christianity had later misinterpreted. While the broader witch cult theory is now a subject of intense academic debate, Bruce's paper was the first to so boldly and directly link Krampus to a specific, named, pre-Christian entity. His analysis cemented the idea that Krampus was not a mere fairy tale, but a genuine survival, a direct echo of the old gods who once ruled the Alpine winter. These different scholarly threads provide a compelling, if unproven, explanation for Krampus's pre-Christian roots. He appears as the product of a complex fusion, the primal energy of the wild man, the divine imagery of the horned god archetype, and the lingering folk memory of both local Alpine spirits and, perhaps, Roman deities. All of these streams of belief flowed together in the isolated valleys, coalescing over centuries into the masked, horned, and chaotic figure that would haunt the winter solstice. This was the raw, pagan material, a spirit of immense folkloric power and cultural significance that the Christian Church would later encounter and be forced to reckon with. The arrival of Christianity in the remote Alpine valleys was a slow and often brutal process of cultural and religious warfare. The Church encountered a deeply rooted folkloric world, populated by the spirits and deities we have just explored. Its primary mission was to supplant this world, to overwrite the pagan imagination with its own theology. This meant that the old gods had to be either erased or reframed. For the horned nature spirits of the Alps, the strategy was clear. The Church needed a face for its ultimate antagonist, Satan. It found a ready-made template in the revered horned deities of the old faith. In a brilliant and devastating act of theological inversion, the Church stripped the horns of their sacred meaning. The symbol of natural divinity became the very emblem of absolute evil. The horned god became the Christian devil. This provided the Church with a decisive weapon. Any ritual, figure, or tradition that involved horns or shaggy fur could now be immediately and easily identified as demonic. The complex, ambivalent nature of the pre-Christian wild man was flattened into a simple, binary evil. He was a servant of Satan, and any engagement with his traditions was a mortal sin. This new, standardized image of the devil was popularized through one of the most effective forms of mass media in the Middle Ages, the religious mystery play. In the Alpine regions, plays performed around the feast day of St. Nicholas, known as Nikolausspiele, were particularly common. These plays were a form of public, theological instruction, designed to teach the illiterate masses the core tenets of the faith in a memorable and entertaining way. A key figure in these plays was a theatrical, often buffoonish, but always ultimately subservient devil. This character's appearance became codified. He was hairy, he had horns and cloven feet, and he often had a long, red, lolling tongue. His role was to tempt and threaten, only to be effortlessly defeated by the serene power of the saint. This provided the final, crucial ingredient for the creation of Krampus. The Church now had a pre-existing, horned, wild spirit from the local Alpine folklore, and it had a pre-existing, standardized, and theatrically popular image of a subservient Christian devil. The next step was to fuse them together. This act of syncretism would solve a pressing theological problem and give birth to the creature we know today. The other side of this theological equation is the figure of Saint Nicholas himself. The historical Nicholas was a 4th century Greek bishop in the Anatolian city of Myra, a man who became legendary for his fierce piety and, most importantly, for his secret acts of charity. The most famous story tells of him anonymously providing dowries for 3 poor daughters, saving them from ruin. Over the centuries, as his legend spread from the Byzantine East into the Germanic West, his character evolved. The feast day on the eve of his death, December 6th, became a major winter celebration. His role as a secret gift giver was transformed, and he became the supernatural patron of children. By the late Middle Ages, his folkloric identity had solidified. He was now a divine judge. Clad in the majestic robes of a bishop, he would travel on the eve of his feast day, carrying a great golden book. In this book were recorded all the deeds of the local children over the past year. He would visit each home to conduct a terrifyingly formal review of their behavior. The virtuous and obedient children, those who could recite their catechism and had honored their parents, were rewarded. They would receive gifts of apples, nuts, and sweets directly from the saint's hand. This was a definitive affirmation of their good behavior, a tangible reward for their piety. The disobedient and sinful children, however, were to be punished. This created a fundamental theological and character problem. Saint Nicholas, at his core, was a figure of absolute goodness, mercy, and sanctity. His brand was benevolence. It was incompatible with his saintly character for him to be the one who would physically strike a child or haul them away. A saint could express disappointment. He could deliver a stern lecture, but he could not be the one to wield the switch or the sack. For the system of judgment and punishment to be truly effective, it needed a second figure. The saint needed a subordinate, an enforcer who could handle the dirty work of corporal punishment that he was too pure to carry out himself. This theological need gave rise to a widespread tradition across Germanic Europe, the companions of Saint Nicholas. These figures were created to serve as the physical arm of the saint's judgment. In the Netherlands and parts of Germany, the companion was Knecht Ruprecht, Servant Rupert, a grim, soot-covered figure who quizzed children on their prayers and threatened them with a bag of ashes. In other German-speaking regions, he was Belsnickel, a crotchety, fur-clad man who carried both switches to frighten the naughty and candy to reward the good. These figures were almost always depicted as human, or, at the very least, earthly. They were rustic, intimidating farmhands, servants, or wild men from the woods. They were scary, but they were not demons. This established a clear job opening in the spiritual landscape of the Alps. A companion was needed. The local folklore already contained a perfect candidate for the role, a horned, shaggy, and terrifying spirit of the winter wild. The stage was now set for the most consequential merger in the history of Yuletide folklore. In the Alpine regions, the vacant role of St. Nicholas's companion was filled by the local horned spirit. This was the moment of his formal creation, a process of religious syncretism that would forge the definitive identity of Krampus. The Church, unable to eradicate the persistent pagan figure, brilliantly chose to co-opt him. The wild man of the mountains was offered a job. This act of absorption was also an act of taming. The chaotic, untamed, and morally ambiguous nature spirit was captured and forced into the service of the new Christian moral order. This transformation was made visually explicit through the addition of a crucial piece of iconography, the iron chains. The beast was now symbolically bound, a captive of the saint, and by extension, the Church itself. He was no longer a sovereign spirit of the wild. He was now a bound devil. This reframing was a theological masterstroke. It allowed the Church to acknowledge the existence and power of this local figure, while simultaneously asserting its own ultimate authority over him. The message was clear. Even this terrifying ancient creature of the mountains must bend his knee to the power of a Christian saint. The partnership created a perfect and terrifyingly effective system of psychological and social control. It presented the world as a complete and inescapable moral universe. Saint Nicholas represented the path of piety and obedience, offering divine grace and tangible rewards. Krampus represented the swift, brutal, and physical consequences of straying from that path. This duality was the key to its power. One figure offered gifts from a sack. The other threatened to put you in a sack. One carried a book of deeds. The other carried a bundle of birch rods. For a child in an alpine village, this was the totality of the cosmic order, played out on their very doorstep. There was no escaping the final judgment. This process preserved the figure of Krampus, but at a cost. It stripped him of his original context as a nature spirit and recast him as a simple monster, a demonic caricature. The nuanced, ambivalent power of the wild man was flattened into the role of a theological bogeyman. Yet this transformation also ensured his survival. By giving the pagan remnant a clear and indispensable job within the Christian narrative, the Church guaranteed his place in the most important winter celebration of the year. The pagan heart of the beast was still beating, but he now wore the chains of a new master. This act of forging the Christmas devil marks the end of his mysterious origins and the beginning of his recorded history. He was now a fully formed character, a paradoxical being of pagan flesh and Christian chains, ready to be unleashed upon the popular imagination of the late medieval world. The creature forged in the late medieval era was a theological paradox, a brilliant but unstable compromise. The Church had put a leash on a pagan spirit, but in doing so, it had also officially sanctioned the presence of a horned, demonic figure in a sacred Christian celebration. This contradiction was a source of constant anxiety for the ecclesiastical authorities. For centuries, the relationship was one of uneasy tolerance. So long as Krampus remained firmly in his subordinate role, a bogeyman to frighten children into piety, the local clergy largely looked the other way. He was a useful, if unsettling, tool for maintaining social and moral order. This tolerance began to fracture during periods of intense religious reform. During the great waves of the Inquisition and later the Counter-Reformation in the 16th and 17th centuries, the church hierarchy took a much harder line against any and all forms of folk religion. The goal was to purify the faith, to stamp out any practice that smelled of paganism or superstition. Krampus was an obvious and immediate target. He was the most visible and flamboyant pagan remnant in the entire Christmas season. Sermons were preached against the devil's processions. Local edicts were issued by powerful bishops, banning the heathenish and scandalous practice of dressing up as the horned beast. The church was attempting to undo its own work of syncretism. It no longer wanted a bound devil. It wanted the devil gone completely. The argument was that the figure of Krampus, far from scaring children into virtue, was actually glorifying the image of the demon, making evil seem exciting and powerful. This crusade, however, was largely a failure. The Krampus tradition was too directly woven into the fabric of alpine winter culture. It was a cherished ritual of social release, a form of communal identity that the people were unwilling to surrender. While the official, large-scale parades may have been suppressed in some areas, the tradition simply went underground, persisting in the more isolated valleys and homes, waiting for the moment the authorities' gaze would turn elsewhere. After surviving centuries of clerical condemnation by persisting in rural valleys, the Krampus tradition exploded back into the public eye during a new and very different era. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was in its glittering, decadent golden age. It was a time of new technologies and new forms of mass communication. One of the most popular of these was the postcard, and this new medium would provide the stage for Krampus's first encounter with fame. Between roughly 1890 and the First World War, a full-blown Krampus craze swept across the alpine regions of the empire. This craze was fueled by the mass production of colorful, bizarre, and often shocking greeting cards, known as Krampus carton. These cards were the primary way people celebrated the season of St. Nicholas and Krampus. Instead of sending serene images of the Nativity or a benevolent saint, people exchanged postcards featuring the terrifying horned devil himself. Millions of these cards were printed and sent through the imperial mail. The cards often bore a simple, cheerful, and ironic greeting. Gruß vom Krampus, greetings from Krampus. This juxtaposition of a friendly salutation with the image of a child-abducting monster is the key to their strange allure. They are a window into a culture with a profoundly different and far more comfortable relationship with the darker side of the holiday. These cards are an invaluable historical record. They are the first time we see Krampus move from a purely oral, folkloric tradition into a reproducible, commercialized, mass media context. The image of the beast was no longer confined to the hand-carved mask of the village performer. It was now a standardized commodity that could be bought, sold, and sent anywhere. This phenomenon forces us to re-evaluate the modern narrative of his revival. The idea that Krampus was a purely terrifying, authentic folk monster until he was recently discovered and commercialized by the internet is a romantic simplification. The Krampus carton proved that this tension is over a century old. They show a society already grappling with the dual nature of the figure. He was a genuine object of fear, a tool for disciplining children, but he was also becoming a beloved cultural mascot, a seasonal celebrity whose image could be used to sell postcards and spread a unique form of holiday cheer. The first commercialization of Krampus was already well underway more than 100 years ago. To look through a collection of antique Krampus carton is to witness the full, contradictory spectrum of Krampus's identity. The cards can be broadly sorted into 3 distinct genres, each revealing a different facet of the society that produced them. The first, and most common, is the terrifying. These are the cards that align most closely with his folkloric origins. They are small masterpieces of domestic horror, depicting Krampus in his primary role as the punisher of naughty children. The imagery is often shockingly direct. We see him thrashing children with his birch rod, chaining them up, and most famously, stuffing them kicking and screaming into his basket. These cards functioned as a genuine tool of discipline. They were sent to children from their parents as a tangible and potent warning in the weeks leading up to St. Nicholas's Day. The message was clear and unambiguous. Your behavior is being watched, and the consequences for transgression will be swift and brutal. They also served as a form of dark, communal humor, a way for adults to share in the thrilling, cathartic fear that the figure represented. The terror was the point. These cards show a culture that embraced, rather than shied away from, the frightening aspects of its own folklore, viewing it as an essential part of the season's emotional landscape. The second genre of card is where the tradition takes a truly bizarre and revealing turn. This is the amorous and humorous category. In these images, the terrifying child abductor is transformed into a strange, almost comical figure of adult anxieties and desires. A great number of cards depict Krampus interacting not with children, but with women. These scenes range from the threatening to the surprisingly romantic. In some, he menacingly leashes a group of women. In others, he is shown as a clumsy suitor, attempting to woo a fashionable lady, his demonic nature a metaphor for a dangerous but thrilling romance. This theme of gendered conflict is often flipped on its head. Many cards depict a complete role reversal, where a group of strong, confident women have managed to capture and tame the beast. They chain him up, steal his switch, and subject him to domestic chores. These cards are a form of social satire, a playful jab at the battle of the sexes and the power dynamics within the Viennese household. The humor can become even more surreal. We see cards depicting Krampus being psychoanalyzed, riding a zeppelin, or even being punished himself by a larger, more intimidating figure. This genre shows his complete absorption into popular culture, where his terrifying image could be used as a flexible template for satire, social commentary, and even flirtation. The final, and perhaps most interesting genre, is the domestic. These cards pull back the curtain on the supernatural partnership itself. They depict Saint Nicholas and Krampus as colleagues, preparing for their annual night of work. We see them traveling together in sleighs, Krampus dutifully carrying the saint's bag of gifts. We see them in a workshop, the saint reviewing his list while Krampus bundles his switches. These cards completely demystify the relationship, framing it as a professional enterprise. They are two sides of a necessary seasonal business, working in tandem to deliver both rewards and punishments. This depiction shows just how thoroughly the duo was integrated into the cultural imagination, to the point where their partnership could be portrayed with a kind of mundane, workaday realism. The sheer volume and variety of the Krampus cartoon force us to a critical conclusion. This phenomenon represents the first true commercialization of Krampus. It is the moment his image was decoupled from the exclusive control of the village community and transformed into a reproducible, saleable commodity for a mass market. This was driven by the technological and social changes of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Advances in color printing made the cards cheap to produce, while the efficiency of the Imperial Postal Service made them easy to distribute. A growing, literate, urban middle class was eager for new and exciting ways to engage with their own cultural heritage. This historical reality profoundly complicates the simple, modern narrative about his revival. The idea that Krampus was a pure, authentic, and terrifying folk monster until the internet discovered and commodified him is a romantic fiction. The Krampus craze of the early 1900s proves this process was already in full swing more than a century ago. The cards are the definitive evidence that Krampus has long occupied a complex and contradictory space between monster and mascot. The terrifying cards show that he remained a genuine bogeyman, a tool for enforcing social norms. The humorous and amorous cards, however, show a figure already being domesticated and defanged, his image flexible enough to be used for satire and even flirtation. This century-old tension is the same dynamic we see playing out today. The modern explosion of Krampus in movies, comics, and merchandise is a direct continuation of the process that began with these simple paper postcards. The medium has changed from the printing press to the internet, but the cultural function is identical. We too engage with him as both a monster and a mascot. We watch horror films that celebrate his terrifying origins, while at the same time, we buy humorous Krampus sweaters and share memes that domesticate him. This dual engagement is not a modern corruption of the legend. It is the legend's most enduring characteristic. The golden age of the Krampus cartoon provides a vital historical context for our own time. It proves that Krampus has never been a simple, monolithic figure. He has always been a complex and adaptable entity, his image shifting to reflect the anxieties, humors, and desires of the society that summons him. The postcard craze was the first great test of this adaptability. a test that would prepare him for the challenges and transformations of the century to come. The end of the First World War shattered the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the decadent cultural landscape of the Krampusgarten. In its place rose the tumultuous and violent political world of the interwar years. It was in this new era that the long, simmering conflict between official authority and the Krampus tradition would explode into open warfare. Following a brief but brutal civil war in 1934, Austria was transformed into a one-party state under the rule of the Fatherland Front, a homegrown political movement known as Austro-fascism. This ideology, led by Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss, was a unique blend of Austrian nationalism, religious piety, and fascist authoritarianism. Its central goal was to forge a new, unified Austrian identity, one that was explicitly Catholic, patriotic, and staunchly opposed to both German Nazism and left-wing socialism. The state's motto was, "My Austria," a declaration of a singular, monolithic national culture that left no room for regional eccentricities or chaotic folk traditions. To achieve its vision, the Fatherland Front waged a war on anything it considered a source of division or impurity. The party aggressively promoted a sanitized, wholesome, and pious folk culture that could serve the interests of the state. In this rigid, top-down vision of national identity, there was no room for a chaotic, demonic, and proudly regional folk tradition like the Krampuslauf. Krampus was the antithesis of the regime's ideals. He was a symbol of rural, local identity, a direct contradiction to the centralized national identity the party was trying to build. He was a figure of chaos and social inversion, a threat to the rigid order and discipline that the fascist state demanded. Most importantly, his pagan roots and demonic appearance were a source of national embarrassment for a state that defined itself as purely and properly Catholic. The government officially prohibited the Krampus tradition. The parades were banned, and the very act of dressing as the creature became a form of political dissent. This ban was a transformative moment in the creature's history. It was the first time he had been targeted not for theological reasons, but for purely political ones. The church had tried to cast him as a demon. The Fatherland Front cast him as a political dissident, a symbol of an impure and degenerate form of Austrian identity. This persecution, however, had the opposite of its intended effect. It transformed Krampus from a simple folk character into a symbol of anti-authoritarianism. To participate in a Krampus run, to don the mask, was now an act of rebellion against the state, a defiant assertion of local identity against the crushing pressure of nationalist conformity. The tradition did not die. It went underground. In the remote valleys, far from the eyes of the federal police in Vienna, the rituals continued in a more private and clandestine form. The fire of the Krampuslauf was dampened, but it was not extinguished. This period cemented Krampus's modern identity as a figure of rebellion. The attempt to erase him gave him a new and more potent meaning. He was no longer just a punisher of naughty children. He was now a symbol of cultural resilience, the wild, untamable beast who refused to be chained by a dictator. The Dollfuss regime itself was short-lived, consumed by the arrival of the Nazis in the Anschluss of 1938. The war against Krampus, however, had failed. The regime was gone, but the spirit it had tried to exorcise remained, hidden in the attics and cellars of the Alpine valleys. The experience had fundamentally changed the creature. His suppression and survival had given him a new layer of meaning. He had been tested by the full force of a modern, totalitarian state, and he had endured. It would not be the last time a modern government would try and fail to tame the alpine beast. After the devastation of the Second World War, Austria entered a new era defined by a desire for peace, stability, and modernity. The nation was rebuilding, and with this reconstruction came a new set of social and cultural ideals, heavily influenced by the victorious Western powers. The focus shifted to the nuclear family, scientific progress, and a rational, forward-looking approach to society. In this new intellectual climate, the ancient figure of Krampus once again found himself cast as an antagonist. The attack, this time, was secular and scientific. The emerging and increasingly influential field of child psychology began to re-evaluate the nation's folk traditions, and it found the terrifying, violent figure of Krampus to be very problematic. The old argument that Krampus was a useful tool for inspiring good behavior was now inverted. Psychologists and social reformers argued that the tradition was, in fact, a source of profound and lasting psychological harm. They contended that terrifying children with tales of a violent child-abducting demon was a form of abuse that could lead to anxiety, neurosis, and a deep-seated distrust of authority. This new thinking was embraced by the post-war Austrian government. Krampus was now framed as a public health issue, a dangerous and primitive custom that was holding the nation back from its bright, modern future. He was a stain on the country's new, progressive image, a relic of a darker, more superstitious past that needed to be scrubbed clean. The government's campaign was direct. State-sponsored organizations distributed pamphlets and educational materials to parents and educators across the country. The most famous of these bore the unambiguous title, Krampus ist ein böser Mann. Krampus is an evil man. These documents laid out the new psychological argument in simple terms. They depicted Krampus as a source of fear and anxiety, a cruel figure who undermined the joyful spirit of Christmas. They encouraged parents to abandon the outdated and harmful tradition and to embrace a more gentle, sanitized, and modern form of the holiday, focused exclusively on the benevolent Saint Nicholas. This was a pervasive ideological assault. The fascist regime had attacked the tradition as a threat to the state. The new democratic government was attacking it as a threat to the family and the individual child. It was an attempt to re-engineer the Austrian psyche from the nursery upwards, to replace the old fears of folklore with the new rationalism of social science. For a time, this campaign was remarkably successful. In the cities and more progressive parts of the country, the tradition began to fade significantly. The public Krampusläufe became tamer and less common. The terrifying home visits all but disappeared. It seemed that the centuries-long war was finally over, and that Krampus, having survived the wrath of the church and the decrees of a dictator, would finally be defeated by the quiet, clinical arguments of the child psychologist. But once again, the tradition proved its resilience. In the more rural and traditionalist alpine communities, the customs were preserved. They were seen as a vital part of a unique cultural heritage, a heritage that was now under threat from a homogenizing urban modernity. The beast was wounded, but he was not dead. He was merely waiting in the high valleys for the world to need his chaos once again. Having traced his long and violent history, we can now pause to place Krampus in his proper context. To truly understand what makes him unique, we must situate him within his wider European family. He is the most famous member of a widespread archetype, the companions of Saint Nicholas, the enforcers who acted as a foil to the benevolent saint. By comparing Krampus to his brothers, we can clearly see the distinct path his legend took. The most common type of companion is the human enforcer. In northern Germany, this role was filled by Knecht Ruprecht, or Servant Rupert. He is typically depicted as a grim, bearded man in the dark robes of a monk or farmhand, his face often darkened with soot. His primary role was to quiz children on their prayers. Those who failed would receive a smack from a bag of ashes, while those who passed would receive simple treats. He is more of a stern catechism instructor than a monster. In southwestern Germany, and among the Pennsylvania Dutch of America, the figure is known as Belsnickel. His name translates to Fur Nicholas, and he is a crotchety, cantankerous man, clad entirely in ragged furs. He is a fascinating transitional figure, often appearing alone and embodying both roles of the partnership. He carries a switch in one hand to frighten the naughty, but also has pockets full of cakes and candies for the good. The French version of the companion is perhaps the most sinister of the human enforcers. He is Père Fouettard, or Father Whipper. His legend gives him a specific and gruesome origin story. He was a wicked butcher or innkeeper who murdered 3 young boys, pickling their remains in a barrel. When Saint Nicholas discovered the crime and miraculously resurrected the boys, he condemned the butcher to serve him for all eternity as a punisher of naughty children. He carries a whip and threatens to dish out the same fate he suffered. This comparative analysis is vital because it reveals what makes Krampus so different. Knecht Ruprecht, Belsnickel, and Père Fouettard are all unquestionably human. They are servants, cantankerous old men, or sinners condemned to penance. Their scariness comes from their grim, earthly authority. They are stern and sometimes violent, but they exist entirely within the human moral framework. Krampus is something else entirely. His nature is explicitly bestial and demonic. His horns, his fur, his cloven hooves, and his serpent's tongue all mark him as a being from outside the human world. He is not a sinner paying his dues. He is a supernatural predator, a tamed monster from the pagan wild. While the other companions enforce the rules of the human world, Krampus seems to bring a piece of a much older, more chaotic world with him. His terror is metaphysical. He is the ultimate other, a creature whose very form is a violation of the Christian order. This distinction is the key to his endurance and his modern appeal. The human companions are relics of a specific social order, their roles as stern disciplinarians feeling increasingly archaic. Krampus, as a true monster, is timeless. His bestial nature allows him to function as a pure archetype of the holiday's dark side in a way his more human counterparts never could. We now arrive at the single most significant point of distinction in Alpine folklore, the error that most commonly separates amateur histories from expert analysis. This is the conflation of Krampus with the Perchten. While modern parades sometimes blur the lines, ethnographically, they are 2 different customs, with different origins, different calendars, and distinctly different purposes. The first clear distinction is their time of appearance. Krampus is a figure of the Advent season. He appears on a specific date, Krampusnacht on December 5th, and is gone by St. Nicholas Day on December 6th. The Perchten are figures of the holy Yuletide season itself. They appear later, during the Rauhnachte, the 12 nights of Christmas, that fall between December 25th and the Epiphany on January 6th. The second distinction is their associated mythological figure. Krampus is the companion of a male Christian saint, Nicholas. He is a subordinate in a Christian moral drama. The Perchten are the followers of a female pagan goddess, Frau Perchta. They are the attendants of an ancient, pre-Christian nature deity. This visual similarity between Krampus and the monstrous Perchten, the ugly Perchten, is the source of the confusion, but it points to a shared origin. Both figures almost certainly evolved from a common, pre-Christian, wild man, or Yuletide monster of alpine midwinter. They are the products of divergent folkloric evolution. The wild figure that appeared in early December was syncretized with the legend of Saint Nicholas and became Krampus. The wild figure that appeared later, during the Rauhnächte, was syncretized with the much older legend of Frau Perchta and became the Perchten. They are folkloric cousins, not identical twins. This divergence in their history led to the most critical difference of all, their purpose. The Perchten tradition has a crucial feature that Krampus completely lacks: a duality. The Perchten are split into two groups. The ugly Perchten resemble Krampus, and their role is to battle winter's demons with loud, apotropaic noise. They are followed by the Perchten, the beautiful Perchten, who bring good fortune and the promise of the new year. This duality reveals the purpose of the Perchtenlauf. It is a cosmological ritual, a symbolic battle between winter and spring. It is a magical act performed for the benefit of the entire community, designed to cleanse the village of evil spirits and ensure a fertile and prosperous year. Its focus is seasonal and agricultural. The Krampuslauf, by contrast, is a sociological ritual. It is concerned with the behavior of individuals. Its purpose is to enforce a specific moral code and reinforce the social hierarchy within the community. Krampus judges specific people for specific sins. The Perchten battle, an abstract cosmic evil. The Perchten ritual is about the community's relationship with the cosmos. The Krampus ritual is about the individual's relationship with the community. This is the definitive delineation. Krampus is a moral enforcer, a social disciplinarian bound to a Christian framework. The Perchten are the agents of a much older, pagan, seasonal magic. One is a figure of sociology, the other of cosmology. Understanding this difference is the final key to truly putting Krampus in his proper context. To understand the final piece of Krampus's modern identity, we must compare him to the figure who now dominates the global holiday, Santa Claus. The popular revival of Krampus in the 21st century can only be understood as a direct reaction to the cultural behemoth that Christmas has become. Over the course of the 20th century, particularly in the Anglo-American world, the holiday underwent a systemic transformation. The religious and folkloric complexities of the season were progressively sanded away. Saint Nicholas, the stern and holy bishop who judged the souls of children, was almost entirely replaced by Santa Claus, a secular, portly, and perpetually jolly grandfather figure. This modern Santa Claus is the product of poems, illustrations, and decades of powerful corporate advertising. He judges no one too harshly. He brings gifts to everyone. His primary function is to serve as the cheerful, universally beloved mascot for the holiday's commercial season. The result is a holiday of unabashed, almost mandatory cheerfulness. The deeper, darker, and more ambivalent aspects of the winter season have been almost entirely erased. The ancient anxieties about darkness, the need for moral reckoning, and the presence of the supernatural have been paved over by a culture of relentless sentimentality and consumerism. It is into this landscape of sanitized sweetness that Krampus re-emerged in the 21st century, propelled by the instant, global reach of the internet. He arrived as a potent and thrilling antidote. For a growing number of people, the discovery of this terrifying alpine monster felt like a reclamation of a more authentic and balanced holiday. He is, in his modern function, the anti-Santa. Where Santa is soft, Krampus is sharp. Where Santa brings rewards, Krampus brings punishment. Where Santa is a figure of unconditional giving, Krampus is a figure of dire consequences. He is a direct and visceral repudiation of the holiday's commercial sentimentality. His revival is driven by a conscious or unconscious desire to restore the darkness that gives the light its meaning. He represents a nostalgia for a grittier and perhaps more meaningful version of the holiday, a version with real stakes. He allows for a more complex and honest emotional response to the season, acknowledging that the world contains both shadow and light. This function as a cultural counterbalance, a necessary monster for a holiday that has become too cheerful, explains his unprecedented boom in popularity. The once obscure alpine folk devil has become the modern patron saint of a more authentic Christmas, a terrifying anti-hero who promises to save the holiday from an overdose of its own sweetness. The final context for Krampus's modern renaissance comes from the story of his most controversial cousin. This is the Dutch figure of Zwarte Piet, or Black Pete. While Krampus has been embraced for his darkness, Zwarte Piet is currently being protested and dismantled, and the contrast between their fates is truly revealing. Unlike the ancient folkloric origins of Krampus, Zwarte Piet is a surprisingly modern invention, solidified in an 1850 children's book. In this story, Saint Nicholas arrives from Spain with a retinue of cheerful, black-skinned servants dressed as Moorish pages. His role is to be a mischievous but friendly assistant, a harmless entertainer who hands out candy. The central, inescapable issue is the character's traditional visual representation, a white performer in full blackface makeup with exaggerated red lips and a curly wig. This depiction is a direct inheritance from 19th century minstrelsy and racist caricatures. In recent decades, this tradition has become the center of a serious and often heated national controversy. Opponents argue, with significant historical evidence, that the figure is a racist caricature, a painful relic of colonialism that has no place in a modern, multicultural society. Defenders of the tradition argue that Zwarte Piet is a harmless children's character with no intended racist malice. A common folk explanation, developed to counter the criticism, claims that his face is black from chimney soot. This, however, fails to explain the curly hair and exaggerated lips. The debate has led to a slow and contentious evolution, with many cities now replacing the traditional figure with sooty Petes, who have only light smudges on their faces. This entire controversy provides the final, revealing lens through which to view Krampus. Society is actively rejecting the uncomfortable historical baggage of Zwarte Piet, a human caricature. At the same time, it is enthusiastically embracing the raw, authentic, and non-human terror of Krampus. Krampus is a monster, a mythological beast. His scariness is archetypal, a terror rooted in our primal relationship with the wild, the dark, and the supernatural. It is not social or racial. This allows him to function as a safe vessel for the holiday's darkness, a terrifying figure that carries no real-world historical trauma for modern audiences. The fates of these two dark companions reveal a fascinating truth about our modern world. We are actively sanitizing and removing the monsters who look too much like us, the ones whose histories are uncomfortably entangled with our own sins. Simultaneously, we are resurrecting the truly monstrous ones. We are unchaining the alpine beast precisely because his otherness is his greatest asset. While one companion is being erased for being tied to a painful human history, Krampus is being celebrated for being tied to a mythical one. This is the final, paradoxical triumph of the bound devil. The global revival of Krampus was built upon a living foundation. While the tradition faded in the cities, it was kept alive in the rural alpine communities, where it underwent a crucial evolution. To understand the modern phenomenon, we must first understand the older ritual it grew out of. For centuries, the primary form of the tradition was the Hausbesuch, or home visit. This was a private, intimate, and highly structured piece of family theatre. On the eve of his feast day, St. Nicholas and his dark companion would visit children in their own homes to pass judgment. The event was centered entirely on the moral indoctrination of the child. The saint would lead the interrogation, questioning the children on their prayers and reviewing their behavior from his great book. Krampus played a supporting role. He was the menacing, silent threat in the corner, the embodiment of the physical consequences should the saint's judgment be negative. His role was to be terrifying, but his actions were entirely dependent on the command of his master. This child-centric ritual, the very tradition that the 1950s government campaign sought to eradicate, has now become increasingly rare. While it is still practiced in some traditionalist communities, its function as a primary tool of child-rearing has largely faded in the modern era. In its place, the modern tradition has become the Krampuslauf, or Krampus Run. This is a public, theatrical, and often large-scale parade. It is a boisterous, noisy, and alcohol-fueled event that moves the action from the private space of the home to the public space of the street. This evolution represents a fundamental shift in the tradition's function. The focus is no longer the moral judgment of children. In the modern Krampuslauf, the performers primarily chase and interact with spectators, who are typically young adults of their own age. The event hardly pretends to be about the figure's original role as a punisher. The modern run is a performance of communal identity. It is a celebration of local culture, a thrilling piece of interactive street theatre, and an act of social release. The goal is to provide an adrenaline-fueled, cathartic experience for the entire community, a welcome injection of chaos into the otherwise orderly pre-Christmas season. This shift from a private ritual of indoctrination to a public performance of identity is the key to Krampus's modern survival. By adapting its function, the tradition found a new and powerful relevance in a world that no longer needed a bogeyman to frighten its children, but was desperate for an authentic and thrilling way to connect with its own cultural roots. The modern Krampuslauf is a showcase for a vibrant and highly respected folk art tradition. The centerpiece of the entire event, the object that transforms a man into a monster, is the mask, known in the alpine regions as the larva. These are not cheap, mass-produced items. They are hand-carved works of art, and their creation is inseparable from the tradition's modern revival. The artists who carve these masks, the Maskenschnitzer, are well-respected masters in their communities. Their craft is a vital part of the tradition's authenticity, a bulwark against the cheapening influence of consumer culture. They are seen as guardians, the keepers of the true face of Krampus. A core tenet of this tradition is the exclusive use of natural materials, chosen to be harmonious with life in the Alps. The masks are carved from local wood, especially zerbi, or stone pine, which is lightweight and durable. The iconic horns are real, taken from the ibex, goats, and rams that inhabit the surrounding mountains. The costumes are made from real animal fur and teeth. This insistence on natural materials is a conscious and thematically vital significant choice. It stands in direct opposition to the world of plastic and rubber masks. It preserves a tangible, physical link to the creature's origins as a spirit of the untamed, natural world. To wear the wood and horn is to connect with the very soul of the Alps. The very name for the mask, the larve, reveals its true purpose. The word is not merely a costume piece, it is a transformative ritual object. Its etymology is revealing. It derives from the ancient Latin word larva, a word that meant both mask and ghost or spectre. This linguistic link implies that the schnitzer who carves the mask is a facilitator of ritual. He is creating a vessel for a spirit. When the young men of the village don the larva, they are engaging in a foundational act of becoming. They are ceasing to be themselves and are allowing the ghost of Krampus to act through them. This act of transformation places the performer in a liminal state. Behind the anonymity of the mask, normal social constraints are suspended. They are granted a ritual of power, inversion, and social release. They can be chaotic, intimidating, and transgressive in a way that would be impossible as an ordinary citizen. They are no longer just dressing up. They have become a temporary vessel for the ancient chaotic spirit of the alpine winter. This understanding of the mask as a transformative key is essential. It shows that even in its modern, theatrical form, the Krampuslauf is still firmly rooted in the primal, magical belief in a world where the boundaries between man and monster are dangerously and thrillingly thin. The modern Krampuslauf is a spectacular performance, but it is far from a random mob. It is a highly organized and structured event, staged by a network of local clubs or troops, known as Passen. To understand the living tradition of Krampus is to understand the social architecture of these formidable and influential groups. These Passen are the heart and soul of the modern tradition. They are formal social clubs, consisting mainly of young men who often join from as young as 10 years old and can remain members for life. Each pass has a distinct identity, a formal name, internal rules, and a strong modern brand, often promoted through social media. They function as a brotherhood, a close-knit social unit that spends the entire year preparing for the Krampus season. They invest thousands of euros and countless hours in their costumes, known as the Gwand. They train, they rehearse, and they cultivate a specific brand for their troupe. Some are known for being particularly terrifying, others for being more theatrical or traditional. This modern ethnographic reality is essential. The tradition is kept alive, funded, and organized by these dedicated social clubs. They are the primary venues for the performance of a very specific form of local and masculine identity. Ethnographic studies of these Passen suggest they serve a deeper purpose in the 21st century. In a world of increasing globalization, they are important sources of identity making. They provide a visceral way for young men to connect with a specific, tangible, and authentic version of their Austrian heritage. The tradition has always been a ritual of power, inversion, and social release, particularly for the strongest young men of the community. In the past, this was a release from the strictures of the church and the hardships of winter. Today, ethnographic research suggests the modern Passion can be a venue for performing a ritualized masculinity that feels threatened by contemporary social changes. The Krampuslauf becomes a sanctioned space for young men to be loud, aggressive, and intimidating in a way that is forbidden in normal, everyday life. It is a performance of a certain kind of primal, masculine dominance, enacted within the safe and structured container of a cherished folk tradition. The modern Passion, therefore, are the contemporary venues for this performance of ritualized power, local pride, and a defiant sense of cultural identity. The revitalization of the tradition within the Alps explains its survival, but the final chapter of his story is one of globalization. This is a fascinating example of a phenomenon known to anthropologists as folklorismus, the adaptation and performance of a folk tradition outside of its original cultural context. The Americanization of Krampus is structurally different from his revival in his homeland. In America, the tradition was not just revived, it was reinvented. The first and most significant change was the decoupling of Krampus from St. Nicholas. In the American context, Krampus almost always appears by himself. The centuries-old partnership, the core theological and folkloric structure of the entire tradition, was severed. This act irrevocably changes his character. The bound devil, the subordinate enforcer in a Christian moral drama, is set free. Without the benevolent saint to act as his master and moral counterbalance, the American Krampus reverts to his more primal form, a solitary, independent monster. He is no longer part of a system of judgment. He is simply the monster. This separation was a necessary part of his import into a culture that has largely forgotten the historical St. Nicholas, and where the holiday's central figure is the secular Santa Claus. The complex theological framework that gave the original partnership its meaning is absent, leaving the monster to stand on his own. Having been unchained from St. Nicholas, the American Krampus was then recoupled with entirely new and different cultural events. He was adopted by American counter-holiday structures, which value spooky entertainment and carnivalesque chaos. In cities like Milwaukee, the annual Krampus parade explicitly functions as a winter Halloween, with Krampus marching alongside other monsters like Wendigos and witches. In New Orleans, the tradition is explicitly modeled on Mardi Gras, with the formation of a formal crew of Krampus. In Los Angeles, the earliest revivals were staged by the Cacophony Society, a counterculture street theater group. This is a total reinvention of the figure. He is divorced from his original alpine moral and social functions. His role as an enforcer of Catholic piety and communal order is completely gone. In its place, he is repurposed for an American cultural context that values spooky entertainment, irony, and countercultural rebellion. The American Krampus is a Christmas monster, but he is a monster in the tradition of Halloween. His purpose is to provide a thrilling, pleasurable, and slightly transgressive scare. He is no longer a figure of genuine theological dread, but the star of a dark, festive carnival. This is the final stage of his long journey, from pagan spirit to bound devil to a free agent of American holiday horror. The story of Krampus is a history of survival. It is a journey that begins in the shadows of the pre-Christian Alps, where a horned spirit of the wild was born from the anxieties of a long and brutal winter. It is a story of capture and transformation, of a pagan beast being hammered into the shape of a Christian devil, bound in chains, and forced into the service of a new god. His history is defined by the forces that have tried to erase him. The Church sought to condemn him as a demon. The Enlightenment sought to dismiss him as a foolish superstition. Authoritarian governments sought to ban him as a symbol of cultural chaos. And modern psychology sought to sanitize him as a source of childhood trauma. Yet, he has survived. He has outlasted them all. The chains that were forged to bind him have become a part of his iconic identity, and in the modern era, they have been symbolically broken. His global revival, his journey from a local alpine bogeyman to an international icon, is the final act of his unbinding. This long, violent, and unlikely survival is the ultimate proof of his purpose. He endures because he is necessary. He is the personification of the holiday's shadow, the thrilling and vital darkness that gives the festive light its meaning. He is the salt that balances the sweetness, the switch that balances the gift, the consequence that gives virtue its value. In a world that constantly seeks to sanitize, simplify, and commercialize its oldest traditions, Krampus is a defiant and welcome blast of authentic, chaotic, and terrifying winter. He is the beast who refuses to be tamed, the ghost of a pagan past who still rattles his chains in our modern world, reminding us that the longest night of the year will always have its monsters.